Chapter 29. Synthetic Mythologies and the Spell of Media. Perception, power, and the rituals we don't know we're in. Cain's children did not vanish. They built kingdoms. They shaped laws. And they told stories not as remembrance but as control. Power, once encoded, seeks expression. It moves not only through empire and bloodlines but through symbol, narrative, and collective dreaming. The story of Cain is not just myth or metaphor. It is a spiritual fracture, one that lives in architecture, in algorithms, in music, in ritual. What began as exile became spectacle. What was once sacred performance is now mass entrainment. And through this lens, we can begin to see the modern world not simply as chaotic, but as ritualized, programmed by the descendants of fragmentation, guided by a myth they do not name but always enact. What we consume, we become, not just in body but in frequency. The stories we listen to, the symbols we absorb, the images we scroll past without question, they shape the blueprint of our perception. And perception, once repeated and reinforced, becomes reality. We co-create the world through attention. And much of our attention today is being pulled into a very specific current. One where darkness is aesthetic, distortion is trend, and symbols once sacred are stripped of meaning, worn like masks by industries that do not believe in their power, but use them anyway. There is a spell unfolding through our screens, not a metaphorical one, an actual energetic manipulation, cloaked in entertainment. Because when intention meets repetition in a shared field of awareness, it becomes ritual. And when ritual lacks sacred purpose, it becomes a siphon. This is not just about fear or morality or nostalgia for cleaner times. It is about frequency and the architecture of consciousness. It is about what happens when millions of minds, especially young ones, are bathed daily in inverted symbols, glorified violence, synthetic sexuality, and occult imagery devoid of context or initiation. Because these things are not neutral. They are not passive. They shape us. And they shape the field we all live in. Throughout history, the decline of nations and cultures has often manifested not only in political or economic terms, but deeply within the collective psyche. This decay permeates the stories societies tell themselves and the ways they express identity and trauma. Media and performance art stand as both mirrors and instruments of this broader descent, reflecting the fracturing of the elemental forces that sustain life and culture. Fire, water, earth, air, and the elusive fifth element, spirit, are fractured and distorted, resulting in a holistic unraveling visible across civilizations. The current era of grotesque performance art and dystopian media narratives is not an aberration, but rather a symptom of this elemental fracture. The disintegration of spirit and balance manifests in culture's obsession with spectacle rooted in suffering and domination. What we see in much contemporary art and popular media echoes ancient patterns, where power is enacted through ritualized displays of violence and control. The spectacle replaces true connection, and trauma is commodified and aestheticized for consumption, often by an elite class that remains detached from the suffering they propagate. This phenomenon is not limited to one culture or region. Across Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece, Rome, East Asia, Africa, and indigenous America, performance and media have historically conveyed the tensions between the ruling class and the populace, between cosmic order and human chaos. In Mesopotamia, ritual dramas surrounding divine kingship express the paradox of elite fragility and control. Egyptian mortuary rites, while proclaiming cosmic harmony, concealed systemic violence and the exploitation inherent in pyramid building. Classical Greek tragedy and Roman gladiatorial games offered the public both a reflection of societal hubris and a controlled release of collective violence. East Asian theater preserved tensions between spiritual order and political power, dramatizing suffering within highly codified forms. African masks and possession rituals served as communal mediations between power and the sacred, balancing authority and ancestral truth. Indigenous American ceremonies, grounded in land and community, often contrast sharply with spectacle for domination, offering models of resilience and healing even amid colonization trauma. In the modern age, these ancient dynamics are transmuted through global media conglomerates, whose productions recycle the same narratives of elite control and mass subjugation. The violence, dystopia, and ritualistic suffering portrayed in films and series like Squid Game or The Hunger Games are contemporary reframings of the spectacle once enacted in ancient arenas and courts. These narratives also align with what cultivation theory identifies as the cumulative impact of media on worldview. Prolonged exposure to such stories normalizes dystopia, inequality, and the commodification of pain. Central to this cultural fracturing is the lineage of what might be called the Cain archetype, the bloodline and spirit of exile, estrangement, and domination. Descendants of this archetype build civilizations that deliberately reject sacred order, favoring structures of power maintained through fear and spectacle. Their generational trauma, amplified through inbreeding, indoctrination, and spiritual alienation, infects the cultural outputs they patronize and produce. The grotesque performances and disturbing media narratives supported by these elites are not simply artistic expressions, but ritualized enactments of their own psychic fragmentation and hunger for control. Take music. It bypasses logic. It enters through vibration, moving directly into the nervous system and emotional body. When lyrics repeat mantras of destruction, emptiness, lust, self-harm, or worship of darker forces, they become incantations, not because the artist believes in them, but because the listener does not question them. In psychological terms, this is called entrainment. In occult terms, invocation. Either way, it embeds. Many modern music videos now include overt satanic and Masonic imagery, black and white checkerboard floors, inverted crosses, pentagrams, blood rituals, goat-headed figures, and Baphomet symbolism. Some of these performances are masked as satire or artistic freedom, but the result is still energetic entrainment. From Lil Nas X's descent into hell and lap dance with the devil, to Sam Smith's horned Grammy performance, to music videos featuring mock cannibalism or rituals with blindfolded dancers in submission poses. The medium is no longer the message, the ritual is. Television and streaming content mirror this inversion. Shows like Lucifer, Sabrina, and American Horror Story blur the lines between good and evil, often casting satanic figures as complex anti-heroes and divine ones as tyrannical or dead. This might seem harmless, a new mythology, but myth is not casual. It is one of the deepest sources of collective programming in human history. When our shared myth becomes one where the demonic is sympathetic and the sacred is ridiculed, the psyche reorganizes accordingly. Children's programming is not exempt. In subtle ways, many shows embed esoteric symbols, glamorize spellcasting, and normalize possession or channeling entities as quirky traits. TikTok and YouTube take this even further. Hashtags trend around shadow work, spiritual possession, blood magic, and fun rituals to summon spirits or alter timelines. There are filters that overlay demonic sigils onto users, faces, and viral sounds using reversed speech, which in certain traditions was considered a form of low magic distorting intention through inversion. Symbolism matters. In every spiritual tradition, symbols are living forms, condensed power, geometry made of memory. When sacred symbols are used without reverence, they do not lose power. They misfire. They bend. They fracture the link between meaning and energy, and in that fracture, entities can enter. Ideas can root. Control systems can be masked as freedom. And then there are the rituals of the ruling class, the ones that pretend to be performances. In 2016, the Gotthard Tunnel opening ceremony in Switzerland was broadcast to millions. It featured horned demons, simulated orgies, a Baphomet figure rising from the earth, and a death and rebirth scene using a half-naked woman in a red veil. The entire ceremony mirrored initiatory occult rites, including sacrifice, sexual alchemy, and invocation of subterranean forces. It was attended by heads of state, brushed off by the media, laughed at by the public, and yet, energetically, it echoed with ancient rituals of inversion and shadow summoning, done not in private temples, but in front of cameras. The decline of cultures, mirrored in their media and art, is a call to awaken the fifth element, the spirit, as the necessary integrative force for holistic renewal. Because myth is not just behind us, it is ahead of us, The spell of media, the ritual of symbol, the psychodrama of empire, these are not random echoes. They are patterns repeating. In the next chapter, we descend even further into the mechanism behind the mask. If we are to be free, we must not only see the spell, we must learn who cast it and why.